Okay, my name is Marie Meuwissen, and this is my father. And your name is?
Sverre Waagen.
Okay, and you were born in Norway in what year?
In 1927, November 9th.
Okay, and so how old were you when World War II began?
About 12 years old.
About 12. And so, do you remember what year was it the war started then?
In 1940, April 9th.
Okay. And so after the war started, were you afraid that Norway would be involved, or did you think they'd stay neutral?
After the war started?
Yeah, after the war started.
Well, Norway did fight the Germans, even though they didn't have much of an army, but they held them off for 2 months. And actually it was a sneak attack of the Germans, because they had big merchant ships in just about every port in Norway. And at the D-Days, that was about midnight on April 9th, they were in every port, and then they just had soldiers and troops there, so they just took over the city just like nothing. And of course the king had gotten hold of it earlier, and they went north in Norway as far as they could. I don't know what kind of transportation they had, I don't really know, but they got way up by Ålesund, and north of Ålesund a little ways, and then they got on some kind of a boat and went to England. But
who is this? The Norwegian?
The Norwegian
soldiers?
king and some of the most important people there in the government. And they had all the gold with them too.
Okay, but this was after the war had started in Europe, though, right?
Yeah, the war in Europe started actually in '39.
So this was about a year later?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I guess, well, this was one of my other questions. Did Norway know that they were coming before they got there, so they basically
No, we didn't know nothing about it. Nothing at all.
Okay, and then my next question was there resistance? So there was just minimal?
There was resistance, but minimum, because Norway only had about 3 airplanes and a very little army, but they had.
Why did they have such a small army?
Because it was peacetime and they didn't expect any problems. And another thing is they had some bunkers in Oslo to cover the Oslo, the harbor or the sea into Oslo.
What are bunkers?
Bunkers is they dug into the mountain there, and they have cannons and stuff like that inside, and like kind of living quarters. But some of the guys who were inside of there were Nazis, and there was an inside job. They just took over the bunkers there, and they didn't have a chance to shoot at any other ships that came in.
Okay, so you were about 12 then when they came?
Right.
Okay, so you were still in school? What grade were you in?
Well, I was 12 years old, whatever grade you were in there.
Was that like 6?
Something like that.
Okay. Now, was your dad there then? Or was he in?
No.
He was in the United States?
He was in the United States, yeah.
Okay. So was it even more scary since your dad wasn't there to take care of your family?
No.
No. Who did take care of the family then?
We just took care of ourselves. We did what we had to do, and that was it.
But you had some uncles and stuff
Oh, I had uncles and aunts living right by and stuff, so that wasn't, and neighbors that we had known for years.
So you had two sisters, though, and they were both still at home?
I had
Or three sisters?
three sisters, yes, and no, they were not home. They were out working in the city. One, I think, was working in Oslo, and one was, I think,
Who was in Oslo?
I think that was Gerd, and Petra was working in Ålesund. And I had another sister, she also worked in Ålesund.
So how old were they then? So you're the youngest, so how old was...
Well, I'm the youngest, and then there was Gerd, she was she was born in 25, and Petra
So
was...
she was only 14, but she was in Ålesund?
Yeah.
Or no, she was in Oslo.
Or maybe she wasn't there or already, maybe that was later she went there. But they did work on small farms at maybe that's where she worked. And she was about 15, 16 at that time. And my other sister was born in 23, and the oldest one was born in 21, I believe.
None of them were there, it was just you and your mom?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so then when they took over in Oslo, and if they came into Ålesund, did they come into your town, the Nazis?
Not right away, but they sure were around there a lot, because they had to travel through that town to get to another town where they were at, so they would go on buses and other vehicle. And they also would come in there with the convoys, because we lived in a fjord, and they would come in there with convoys and anchor there. So they were, before they went, usually they had to go by Stad, and that is the most southern point in Norway, and that was a very bad spot to go by, because the Americans and the English were there watching them and either bombing them or torpedoing them or doing something to them. So a lot of times they would come into the fjord and anchor there overnight, and we had to, during the war, we had to, couldn't show any lights through the windows. We had to have them covered completely, and if there was any light showing through the windows, the Germans would come around knocking on the doors, and either we cover it up or get the light out somehow.
So did they like make everybody like check in or register? I mean, did they have a post in the little town? What was that one?
They had
that other one that we always went to.
Larsnes.
Larsnes. Yes.
Yeah, they had a place in Larsnes, and we had to turn in all the radios that was in town had to be turned in, and the penalty for keeping one was the death penalty. So everybody had to turn them into the German occupation soldiers. And they took different houses there, that usually the newer and the better ones, bigger ones, and used them for their...
So they just kicked the people out?
Yes, more or less so.
So other people just took those people in then, or?
Well, I don't remember where they went, but I'm sure they had relatives somewhere they got in with.
That was one of my other questions. And if they made you give all the radios, so then you really didn't know what was going on with the rest of the war, or with the U.S., or who was winning or anything, because you didn't have any communication?
No, the only legal communication we had was the newspaper, and that was, they had to print what the Germans wanted, and there was, whenever there was an attack anywhere, there was so many American planes shot down and so many Americans killed, and hardly ever any Germans killed. That's the way they did it. But we had, especially in the beginning of the war, we had what we called undergrounds, and they had a radio that they were at 7 o'clock every night. We could hear the real truth message, you know. And
how did you hear that though?
well, there was on the radio. Of course, there was some people, you know, that had not turned in the radio, and the Germans didn't really know that they had a radio, so they will hide the radios in certain places, sometimes up in the mountains or in a old boathouse or somewhere, and they will go and listen to it. But they were very careful with telling anybody that they had a radio. There was maybe only 2 or 3 guys that would know that they had a radio, and the news from there was very secret, because if they found out, then they could get the death penalty. So it was serious stuff.
So like just some people would go and listen to this broadcast,
Just
and
like
then they would tell the rest of the people?
They would tell sometimes, you know, but they were careful who they would tell it to too, you know.
So did you guys have a radio?
No, we didn't have no radio where we were at, and but we did get some news from different people, you know, off and on what was going on. But the funniest part of this stuff, you know, the Germans were hunting for this guys had a station that was giving out this radio information, and on the bus that went by our place every morning and every night, these guys was riding on that bus at least one time, and they had their radio equipment in their suitcases, and the German was sitting right next to them. and they didn't know it, you know, and that's how things went on during the war, you know, and the Germans never could figure out where these guys were, because they were moved from one place to another every day. They were never in the same place. So when the Germans zero in on them, if they found that place, there was nothing there, you know. So they had a heck of a time to catch them. But then after a year or so, it got very hot for them, so they finally had to quit. And they gave it up. I don't know what happened to those guys, but I am sure that they made it to after the war. And another thing that was very common during the war was with people with fishing boats that fished on the coast, you know, mostly for herring. They would watch for a night with very foggy weather, or in the wintertime, a lot of snowstorm or something like that, and they would take families with them, you know, and put them on the boats. You know, this would be boats where had a kind of a room underneath the deck, you know, where they could hide them, and they would try and take off to England. A lot of them made it to England, but the ones...
Were these just like small family boats, or the big commercial boats?
No, it was not commercial boat. There would be small fishing boats, anywhere from 35 foot up to about 60 foot or something in that order.
But were those made to go across?
Well, they could go. They could go across to England. That was, as far as the size of the boat, there was no problem. But the Germans was always looking for them, and if they caught them, they would come aboard the boat, and a lot of times what they did was open up the deck there so they could see what was underneath, and they would use machine gun to kill the people. That I heard about quite a few times, that was done. But Norwegians were pretty tough people, and they kept on doing this. Many different boats did this. So I would
No,
say
some
that
of them made it.
some of them made it and some of them didn't. So they never gave up.
So were the English boats out there too, like to a certain area, watching for them to try to come across, or? Really
There would be sometimes there would be English destroyers and Americans in there, but they didn't watch really for stuff like that. They had more important things to do. You know, it was U-boats and stuff like that they were after, and watching their own convoy, because there was lots of convoys coming from America to England, because England was so close to Europe that that was the place to go when they were going to go to Germany for bombing, you know. And
but the U.S. didn't really enter the war until later, though, right?
yeah,
but had they still sent ships before that?
They had things going on, but it was very quiet. Nobody knew about it, but they were preparing.
So did they watch like where people went? I mean, like you couldn't leave the town or anything, or?
Oh, we all had to have passports. There was no question about that, and you had to have the passport on you at all the time, and they would check it out and stuff like that. And then
So what if you didn't have a passport? You had to go and get one?
You had to go and get one. That was the deal. You had to have a passport, and if the Germans stopped you, you had to show them the passport. And another thing, like in the cities, they don't allow people to gather up, like especially men. If you were more than 2 or 3 on a corner, they would come and break it up right away, and because they figured you were up to something. So
everybody kind of just went on like going to school and
yeah, they
doing
tried
their jobs.
to live a normal life under the circumstances, but then I don't remember which year it was, but there was one year, probably a couple of years into the war, probably in 42 or maybe even later, they closed all the schools in Norway. And I remember being out of the school, and they took all the teachers and they took them to, I think it was someplace in Oslo, and they had to go through some Nazi schooling and stuff, and well, after I think it was 2 or 3 months, or maybe there was more, but it was at least that, then they were allowed to open up the school again. And another thing they did was...
So then they were supposed to teach you Nazi teachings?
No, but there was certain things they couldn't teach us, you know. I can't remember all those things, you know, and certain things we could do and certain things we could not do. And about that same year, they were going to close all the churches in Norway. And they did close them, but only for a short time, because I don't know what happened, but I think the German people who were in charge of all this, you know, figured that wasn't worth doing, you know, so they let them open up again, but they called in the ministers and stuff, and they had to go through some schooling, and there was certain things they could say and certain things you couldn't say. It was a saying, you can think what you want to, but you can't say what you want to. That was the whole thing, you know.
Yeah, like behind your farm, there's the mountain, and there's the top of the mountain. So did they like set posts up there where you could see, you know, like you could see all those fjords, or not? They were
not right there, but like in Larsnes, and across the fjord from Larsnes, there was islands with mountains on there, and they had all kinds of artillery and posts there that they all the modern equipment they had at that time, so they know what was going on everywhere, you know. They had a lot of soldiers there, but a lot of times we would have English or American destroyer coming in. There's a place called Måløy where lots of my uncles lived right around in that area, And I remember in 1942, on Christmas Day, in English, I don't know if it was English or an American destroyer, came in, and it was very narrow places they had to go through to get in there, exactly the way they did. So we know that these were very good seamen from Norway that had escaped and got to England, you know, and they were the skippers in this,
They guided them in.
guiding them in there, you know, and they took over the whole town and took a whole bunch of German soldiers with them as prisoners, and a lot of them got killed, and they stayed there for about 2 hours and something like that, and then they left. More or less what they were trying to do is see how strong the Germans were on certain spot, because they were at that time figuring on an invasion of Norway, as never did happen, but that is what they were trying to figure out, if it was worth it or not.
So like all down the coast then, did they have like troops in like scattered cities?
Oh yes, all around the coast especially. And the American was always there, and the English, of course, trying to hit these boats, you know, and they got out in the sea a little ways, you know, because there's certain spots they have to go out farther and otherwise, and that's when they will either torpedo them or bomb them. So it was a common scene around the coast, especially the west coast of Norway, to see big boats, you know, maybe 80 foot or in that order, that had been bombed or shot at, you know, and the only thing they did was just steer them towards the shore, and they were laying there and they were wrecked, you know. But that was a common scene around the coast.
So did they gun the coastline too? I mean, so did the people have to like see the ships and just go running for the mountains, or what? I mean,
well,
they don't know which ones are Germans and which are Norwegians, right?
Well, this was mostly German ship, you know, or ship that was going with German stuff.
This was just out at sea, though.
Right.
They didn't.
So when they got hit like that, they just hit for the shore, and that way they probably
And
saved.
the English ships stopped, then they don't follow them in.
No, they didn't follow them in. They were just more the idea to paralyze them so they couldn't use them again. See.
So there really wasn't any actual fighting in the towns, though, like by yours.
No, not really that. They would have patrols coming around, and they know exactly which people that had relatives living in the United States or England, you know. Those people were bothered more so than anybody else, because they thought maybe we were hiding some spice.
So did they bother you then, since your dad was over there?
They didn't bother me, our place, because there was just me and my mother, and I was so young. But one of our neighbors, they had older sons and stuff, you know, and they were there quite a few times, and they would check the potato cellar, they would check the hay lofts, and everything like that, you know, and they didn't find anything, so they left. But of course, the American would drop what you call American spies. They would be Norwegians that had left England, you know, or been in Norway and went to England, and then now they come back as spies, and they would drop them off up in the mountains, and they would operate different kind of
How would they drop them off in the mountains?
parachute.
A parachute.
Yeah, in the mountain, and they would organize the Norwegians, you know. So actually, we had uniforms. It was called the Norwegian Undergrounds, and they would have places where they had stored uniforms and weapon and everything, just in case of an invasion of Norway, they would be ready to help out, see.
So they were Norwegian uniforms? Army uniforms?
Yeah. And getting back to one place, right inside of Stad, if you looked at the map.
So where's that, south?
That is the southern point of Norway, where they a lot of them.
Bergen, then, even, right?
No, it's south of Ålesund.
South of Ålesund.
Yeah.
So it's between Bergen and Ålesund.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my mother's uncles, they lived on this island there, and they were very active in the underground there, and they had stacks of weapon and ammunition and all kinds of stuff for underground troops. And the German had found out about it somehow, and they raided that island. But right before they raided it, I think it was my mother's uncle. He got in a rowboat and got away from there. He was one of the leaders of that, and he got to the mainland and got up in the mountains, and Germans never found him, but they arrested a lot of the other ones. But they went through all the mountains up there trying to find him. And they
what was his name then? What was her main name?
Venoy.
So he was a Vanoy?
Yeah, and
so all the other people were killed that they...
Lots of them were, and a lot of them were taken prisoners, you know, and I suppose they were sent to the German concentration camp. They had one in Oslo, and they sent some of them to the concentration camp in Germany.
So was there only one concentration camp in Norway, in Oslo?
As far as I know, there was only one. They maybe had other smaller ones.
Did they have the gas chambers too?
In Norway, I don't think they did. That was just that I have heard of was in Germany.
So, like, did they know who they were looking for when they were looking for your uncle?
They know some of the names, yes, because...
So, like, they didn't come back to your mom then, knowing that he had gotten away?
No, they didn't come there, but they were... some of them lived up in the mountains, you know, some of his relatives, and they were there quite often because there was more men living there, you know, and he was there up on that... There was a farm up there, and he was there on that farm most of the time. But they never found him. He was, one time he was, where they had a sheep, there was a floor, and they made a place underneath where the sheep were that he could lay, see, and then they covered it up with sheep manure and stuff like that, and when the German come, he would go underneath there, you know, and anyhow, they never found him. So the stories like that was quite common. And another story was that my grandfather and that would be my uncles, my mother's brothers, they had a radio, and they know what was going on all the time, and they lived on another island not too far from the one that I just got through talking about. And they had a radio in the boathouse. There was a big boathouse because my grandfather was a big fisherman, had a lot of nets they kept there. And they would go there and pick up nets, you know, for mending the nets because they had to be repaired all the time because they would tear. And one time the Germans came, and one of my uncles was there and had been listening to the radio, and they could only spot you if they had a radio on. So he noticed a boat coming in, you know, so he took the radio, and there was a rock outside of the boathouse, and there was a lot of snow, and he threw the radio on the other side of that rock in the snow. And then he took one of those nets and was carrying them, and likely he was just there getting the net. they stopped him and looked all over for this. I couldn't find a thing. So this kind of stuff was going on quite frequently.
So were the soldiers mean to the people in town though? I mean, did they hurt anybody?
Well, that depends. We usually stayed away from them. We usually tried not to have anything to do with them at all, and actually they never did anything right there in town. But if you were caught with not cooperating with them, that was a different story. Every day later on in the, like in 43, 44, and up in 45, especially in 44, there was lots of underground troops in Norway, you know. We were civilian in the daytime, and then there would be, they would do things at night, you know. And
so there was a curfew too?
Oh yes, there was curfew and stuff like that, and I remember one time when I was in Måløy. That's that same town that they had took over. The American took over for a couple of hours, and they had a movie theater there, and we were allowed to go to the movie theater. So I went there, and
with some friends, or?
No, I was all by myself when I went there, and I was on a boat laying at the pier there, so it wasn't that far for me to go up there. I was about 16 years old then, I suppose, and they would have raids on the people in the movie because they figured that there might be American spies in there, you know. So they surrounded the movie theater and was checking everybody's passes there and see if there was any strange people in there. You know, they would do this quite often, and they did that this time when I was in there. I jumped through a window and got out, and they didn't catch me. And because you never know what they were looking for and what they wanted, so you didn't want them to question you, because sometimes when they question you, they take you to other places and arrest you, and hard telling what they decide to do with you. So if you can get away from it, that was better.
So you don't know anybody that got like beat up or hurt by them?
No, not really beat up, but I know that there was lots of them that got caught being in the underground like that, and had done something they called against the German occupation troops, you know, and that was a big penalty for that. And every day in those later years, like in 44 especially, towards the end of 44, you will read in the newspaper, there will be a list of that long of people that were shot to death, and the reason they were shot to death was because of doing something against the German troops, you know. So this was a common thing, and I don't know exactly where they did all this, but I have heard that they did have to dig their own graves in the woods, and like a ditch, and then they lined them up on the ditch, and then they would have a firing squad, and they shoot them, and then they fall in the ditch, and then somebody else had to cover them up. See? That was very common towards the end of the war.
So pretty much the ordinary people, they just kind of left them alone.
Yes, the ordinary people, they didn't do much too. But
I mean,
of course,
it just seems like they were so rotten that they would have probably walked down the street and picked fights and just to beat the crap out of people or whatever.
They were actually the average soldiers were very well disciplined, to a certain degree, but there was a lot of women that got caught with them, you know. If they would catch women and rape them, you know, that they would do, you know.
That's what I was wondering. So that was common?
That was very common. You heard about story, but a lot of the stories didn't get out. I heard about one story where she was raped by nine different soldiers, you know. And of course, at that time there was no penalty for anything like that. So that happened quite frequently. So it was very.
So then, did they kill these women, or did they let them go?
No, they let them go. I heard of they let them go, but the soldier never got any discipline order from them.
So they didn't like bring any women with them, like when the troops came. I mean, because you hear stories. Some of these fighting troops, they had women that traveled with them. You know, like horses or whatever.
There would be women that associated with them, but if the Norwegians found out that they were going with them German soldiers, they will have like these underground troops at night. They would know exactly who they were. They will catch them and cut their hair off, shave their hair off, so everybody know who they were. That was one thing.
Maybe they were trying to be spies and get information.
No, they know. We know pretty much what was going on with that kind of stuff, but everybody know who they were, so they would always wear hats and stuff, so they couldn't tell, you know.
So it was really kind of scary for the younger.
Oh yes, definitely for women it was different, of course, but that is the way.
So what about your sisters? Did they have any trouble?
I don't think they had any problem that they ever told me, anyhow. But the thing was that you never go out alone without having at least a man friend with you when you walk from home from work or something in that order, you know.
So what time was the curfew? Like at 6 or later?
Usually when it was dark. When it would get dark, then it was the curfew, you know, and you can expect to get stopped anytime if you were out after that. And they question you, who are you, and where are you going, what are you doing, and you know, that kind of stuff. And it was very strict that way. So.
Okay, let's see. I just thought of something. Oh, did they ever come to your house directly, the soldiers?
Yeah, they will come to our house, and I remember one time they came and knocked on the door, and I opened the door, and they said that they saw some light through my window. And at that time, usually when they were very strict with that was when they had a convoy in the fjord, then they didn't want no light whatsoever, so we had to...
So there was boats in your fjord,
right,
sitting right there.
Right, and we had to make sure then we just didn't have no light down at all, you know. So stuff like that did happen, and then there would be a lot of times they would come around and try to buy stuff, you know, like eggs and milk and stuff like that, but we always told them we didn't have any. Even if we had, because that was a common thing. You don't sell them anything. They were the enemy. And if you can get
so
by
how
them,
did they get food? Did they just take food?
They took food, like when we had a small farm, and on the small farm they know exactly how many sheep we had and how many cows we had and how many calves we had and stuff like that, and if we killed one, they wanted to know where that meat went, because we were not allowed to keep the meat ourselves. We had to take it to the store where they where they butchered it up, and they went to the German soldiers. That's what I heard, anyhow. So the only time we could get something meat was like if a sheep had twins, you know. We give up one lamb, but the second one we could raise it and kill it, and they wouldn't know about it. So, stuff like that.
So basically you had enough food then?
Well, we had ration cards, and they were very, very short with the bread, like you had to buy flours and make your own bread, of course, but that flour wasn't like flours you can buy today, It was like when you try to make bread out of it, half of the bread, the bottom half, would be all like it was raw, whatever they mixed in the flour, we don't know, but it was, it wouldn't
rise.
Yeah, it wouldn't rise, and it would just fall apart, the bread would fall apart, and you only got so much every month, and we didn't have as much problem with that because we lived on a farm, because we raised a lot of potatoes and we fished a lot, so we had fish and potatoes. But then there was times when I can remember that all we had was potatoes and rock salt for a meal. So those things were a lot harder for the people that lived in the city, because they had less places to get stuff from.
So they let you go fish though?
Oh yeah, you can go and fish. That was no problem, And
Do you have to give them some of what you caught?
No, not the commercial one had to. Yes, all the herring, that was all the herring, the big boat fish that went for. They took over the factories, and a lot of the herring had this oil in where they make bombs out of and stuff. So that had definitely went for the German, So and other like codfish and stuff like that, they took as much as they wanted of that, and they shipped it out of the country too, And sugar and butter and stuff like that was very, very little of, and coffee we didn't see for many years. They had something they called coffee, but I think it was like rye that was kind of burned dry, like, and then they grind it up. It looked like coffee, but it tasted entirely different. So.
Well, I remember you once saying that you guys went out in the boats at night in the dark trying to catch fish. What was that? I mean, you could fish during the day though?
Yeah, you can fish during the day. And like when I was there, I was working with my uncle. We were fishing shrimp out of the coast there, and the German took the boat, and my uncle and me, and we had to work for them. And whatever they told us we had to do, and if we didn't do that, then we go in concentration camp or some place they would have for us. So the best thing to do was to kind of cooperate with them the way they wanted us to do, But I remember one time especially, there was we were in Askvoll, Norway. It's it's pretty close to Bergen. It's closer to Bergen than Måløy anyhow, north of Florø. South of Florø. And we had a big storm, and the Germans had a lot of troops in there, and they had the coast mined off with mines. And those mines, some of them are under the water, and just a few probably would be above the water, and then it was high sea. And anyhow, some of these mines, they had a belt of mines so that if the Americans were trying to land or something, you know, they couldn't get in. And they came and told us that we had to go out to that minefield, and they put a bunch of German soldiers aboard, and it was high sea. And we had to go out there and catch these mines that was floating, and then we had to drive them back to where that net was. And the German soldier would fasten them. They were, I would say that for them though, that those German soldiers really did know what they were doing with that, but it was a very dangerous job because high sea, and you have these mines, and they're big like this, you know, big round like that, and they have horns on them. And if one of these horns hit your boat, boom, you know. And if there was a belt on them, most likely they all would go off, you know. So it was a very difficult job. But my uncle was a very good seaman, and he could maneuver that boat pretty good. Anyhow,
So who was this uncle?
This was Oscar, Magnus' dad. And we got it fixed and got away from there, but that was one of the scariest deals we had with the Germans in the open sea, anyhow.
Well, Linda said that you told her that once they came, and I thought it was Peter's dad hid you in the boathouse or something. Do you remember telling her that?
He was what?
That he hid you in the boathouse because the Germans were coming or something?
No.
Did they try and get like the young men to join their armies or anything like that?
They drafted the younger men because I was still too young, but the ones who were 18 and 19, that's the one they wanted. They drafted a whole bunch of them, and my cousin who lived next door to me, he was in that age, and he was drafted, but he was gone. Peter, yeah, and he was drafted, and they went to some camp, and what they did, I don't know, but he was gone for 2-3 months, and then he came back, but he never said too much about what they had to do, but and what the reason was. I think they more or less wanted them so they know where they were at all the time in that age, because they were the most dangerous people to have, you know, these young fellows. So they kind of lined them up like that.
Okay, so I asked if you stayed in Gerskavaten the whole time, but so you kind of moved around because you said you were in Mole.
Yeah, I was in Mole, yeah, and Venøy, and over in there, Askeland, Florø, and in there, yes.
So if you were 12, and then it lasted for what, 4 years? Or 4 or 5?
The war lasted 5 years.
So like you were done with school then, when it was done?
Yeah. Yeah, I was.
Well, 5 would have been 17.
Well, yeah, I was through with the school when the war was over. Yes, I remember that day very well. When the war was over, we heard that they were getting close to that something could happen, you know, and I lived on a little farm, you know, and we were doing stuff in the spring, you know, planting potatoes and oats and stuff like that, and I worked hard all day, and it was about 10:30 at night I went to bed, and I heard this accordion music and these people hollering and screaming, and I said, gee, usually it was quiet, you know, and I couldn't figure out what all this was about. So I got up and got dressed and walked towards Waagen, you know, that's where people usually met. And here everybody is celebrating. The war was over. And they celebrated all night long.
But so what happened? Okay, did you guys know when the U.S. entered the war? They told you that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we know
So
about
then, did you hear when they bombed Pearl Harbor? You knew that happened then?
Yeah.
I would imagine they were proud of that, right?
Yeah, we heard about that, but not that all that much, you know, because that was in '42, and there was something. You got to remember, we didn't have no radio, so it was only what we could read in newspapers, you know. But we heard about it, yes.
So, so you know that the U.S. was in there, and so then they obviously heard about Hiroshima. 'Cause that was the end, wasn't it?
Yep, that was
Okay.
the end. Yeah,
So then what happened to the soldiers? Did they just like get on their ships and just leave, or did
No,
they,
all the ships that was around in that area, they would come in and not exactly in Gusken, but Sandvik, you know where that is, a little farther out in the fjord. They would come in there with the boats and they would anchor there and waiting for different orders. They had already gotten orders to give up. But that day when the war was over, you will be surprised. We had an army going everywhere. The Norwegian underground, they were in full uniform with weapon and everything else, and they had ordered them to take over the German camps. And these soldiers, you know, they went over there and took over the camp. There was, I don't know, probably 200-300 soldiers there. And the German captain, we had a picture of it, that's how I know. I didn't see it, but there's a picture of it when the German officer came out and met the Norwegian underground troops, you know, in uniform, and gave them the orders to give up, you know, and they had already given up. They were kind of tired of the war in the first place too, so they gave up, and they took over the camp and did whatever they had to do to get them.
So they basically just rounded up the
Yeah,
German
there
troops
was. I didn't hear about any. There was a very few that they would do any cause any trouble. You know, they gave up pretty good. You know, and then the Norwegian underground troops took over the camp and was guarding everything. You know, make sure that they didn't operate any other weapon or artillery or anything like that. And
So did any British ships or American ships come in at that point to like take them away, or what happened to these soldiers?
I don't really remember how that went, but they had certain places they had to meet, and there was the English and American. I know they came into Oslo and took over there, and American troops, you know, and they had a certain way. They arrested all the Germans, you know, and stuff, and then they released them one by one or bunch by bunch or whatever. But that's the way it was done, you know, because they had already given up, and that was it. And then because a lot of the things they made them do was like cleaning up the minefield and the landmine they had around. They made them do all that before they could leave, you know. So it took a few months to get all this done, you know, before they were released. And where they went, I don't know. I suppose they were sent home to their spot in Germany, except for a few of them that was more Nazi, you know.
Which brings us to that guy, what's his name?
Quisling?
Quisling, yes. So did you guys all know about him?
Oh, we know about him because he's the one that was in charge of giving Norway to the German troops, you know,
in Oslo.
yeah, well, in all Norway, you know, he the one who was ahead of. He was running the country for 5 years.
Norway?
Yes.
Before the war?
No.
No, during the...
Because the German had picked him, you know, and he was running Norway from 1940 till the war was over. And, of course, he was what you call a poppy, is that what you call him? You know?
Puppet.
Yeah, the Germans told him what to do, and he says what he's supposed to do. So it looked like that he was running the country, but the Germans, of course, was in control. No, after the war was over, that was one of the first guys they got. He was hated by all Norway, you know, and they caught him right away, and I don't know how many days afterwards it was. They hanged him at the market in Oslo, but they didn't hang him like a normal guy. They hanged him upside down because they said he wasn't worth hanging the normal way.
I heard that they took him to the concentration camp, and made him look at all the stuff that he had caused too, or something.
That could have been that they did that before they hanged him, but I know he was
in Oslo.
I know he was hanged in Oslo. That I know.
Then there was another story I read about some big plant, like where the Nazis were trying to make atomic bombs or something.
Yes. And Norway played a big part in that. And during the war, that was up in it wasn't too far from the Swedish border. They had underground troops there, up in the mountain, hiding up in the mountains, and there's a lot of wild mountains up in there. It was good places to hide, and they were there. And the Germans had a big factory that they had figured out how to make atomic water. I don't know exactly how that worked, but...
So was this originally a Norwegian factory of some sort that they converted?
I don't know if that was it or what, but I know there was a big factory there, and if they would have gotten the bomb, they were pretty close to getting it. But the Norwegian undergrounds had it all figured out how to do it, and they went on ski with knapsack on their back, and they come through the mountains there, and somehow they got through the guards and into this factory, and with dynamite and dynamite the whole place. And one guy got caught, but the other guy, got away and got on ski and was able to cross the border and into Sweden. They never caught him, but that put the Germans back quite a few months. So
they blew up the whole place?
They blew up the whole place, yes. And then there was another ship that was going to Germany with some of that stuff, and the Norwegian underground had put some dynamite on the bottom of the ship, so when it got out to sea, it exploded or something. I don't know, but they didn't get there. So they played a big part in that the Germans never did get the atomic bomb.
So Sweden was under occupation too?
No.
Sweden got left out. They were fighting?
No.
What happened to Sweden?
Well, the thing was, the German troops came through Denmark, took over Denmark, and they took over Holland and Belgium and Denmark, and they made
across to Oslo.
Yeah, well, actually across from Stockholm or Göteborg rather, and they made some deal with the Swedish government, I guess, that they could take the train through Sweden and into Norway, and the Swedes let them. They didn't resist at all. They figured that if they could stay out of the war, then they didn't have to have anybody killed or anything like that. And so that made a lot of hard feelings between the Danes and the Norwegians. They didn't like Sweden after that very much. So.
Well, did Sweden have an army, or they had a very little army too?
They probably had a small army too, but the thing was even though Norway had a small army, they resisted and fought the German for 2 months before they finally gave up, as the Swedes just let them go through. That is.
Well, so at first, though, did Norway just try to stay neutral and they didn't want to take sides, or did they side with England and the U.S.?
Who?
Norway.
Norway? No, the Norwegians had always been that way. They stand up for the right, you know. They took sides right away, you know. They were against the Germans.
They were.
Yes.
Okay. And so where was your dad? Was he actually in the army then, at that time, fighting for the U.S.? He
was over here. He wasn't actually in the army, but he worked as a civilian in the army camps. He worked as a civilian as a cook in different places where they trained soldiers, you know, to go overseas and stuff.
In the U.S.
In the U.S., yes. My dad was in First World War. He was. That's how he. Well, you had a chance then. Either you go join the army, or you have to go back to Norway, and you are not allowed to come back in again. Of course, he was the kind of guy that was going to fight for the country that he believed in, and he joined the army. A lot of people didn't, you know. They left, you know. So he was in Second World War. I mean, in First World War. And in Second World War, he worked as a civilian with the U.S. Army.
So when was the last time that he was over there to see you guys, then before the war?
Well, he was, like they did in Europe, those years, they would come over to America and make money, and then they would go back to Norway and Sweden and Denmark. All those countries did that. And then, of course, if you had $1, you would get $5 in Norwegian money, you know. That's the difference in the money, and you got about the same for the money. So that's why the people, a lot of guys would go over here and make money, and then the money went so much farther in Norway. And he did this, and he had made quite a bit of money, and he bought fishing boats and fishing nets and stuff, and they were fishing a lot of codfish up in northern Norway. And for a couple of years he did pretty good, and then all of a sudden there was no more codfish up there, so he kind of sat there with all these nets and stuff and fishing equipment, and couldn't make no money. Anyhow, he had gotten married in Norway and lived there for 7 years, and if he didn't come back to the United States, he would lose his citizenship, because he had already gotten the citizenship. So he left in 1927 and come back over here, and he did pretty good over here again, and but he was going to be very careful now, so he put all his money in the bank and had quite a few dollars in the bank. And you know what happened to the banks? They all went broke, so he was broke again. That was, and I was born a few months after he came over here the second time.
And so he didn't come back again after that?
No, then the depression started here. See, he went over there in 27 again, And then he did pretty good for a few years, and then in the 30s, you know, the Depression came here, and he lost everything. And he told me one time that he had to work 16 hours a day in the field in the hot sun picking corn, and he made 50 cents a day. So things weren't very good here at that time either.
And that was in Minnesota that he was.
He was in different states, in Minnesota, Iowa, and South Dakota, and those kind of places.
So did he have dual citizenship?
Pardon?
Did he have dual citizenship?
What is dual?
I mean, was he still a citizen of Norway and
No,
a
he
citizen
was
of the US?
he was a citizen of the United States.
So you had to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay, so then during the war, of course, you guys didn't have any contact with him, no letters or anything. So then after the war, did he contact you?
Yes, after the war. Well, matter of fact, we got a letter one time. I don't know how that got through, but any letter that came from the United States was opened by the German government, you know, in Norway, and then resealed, you know, because they. I can remember that.
Yeah.
But we did hear from right after the war, and that's when I came over here in 1947.
So you came two years after the war?
Yeah, and I came over here on a U.S. transport ship that was in Oslo picking up, had brought soldiers over to Europe, and then they were going back empty, and they were taking aboard people that wanted to go to the United States. And then they stopped in England and took some more people there, and the ship was called Marine Jumper. And that's how I got to New York, and that was in 47.
And so that boat went to Ellis Island?
Huh?
Did it go to Ellis Island? In New York, that place where you had to, by the Statue of Liberty?
Yeah, we went through there, yeah, the Statue of Liberty, yes. And I had, when I got to New York, I had $50 in my pocket. And then I had to go to South Dakota on the train. And I was told it was very cold in South Dakota, so I had to make sure I had a lot of clothes on. So I had woolen undershirt on, a regular shirt on, and a winter suit, and long underwear on.
And what month was this?
In July. And I got to South Dakota. That day I got to South Dakota, it was 105 degrees. So.
Okay, well, let's see. I have a couple of backup questions. Okay, so when the war was going on, though, did you get to a point where the people thought it was never going to end?
They enter your mind quite a few times. You were sick and tired of it, but you tried to do your best, you know, to make it through, you know. Like we didn't in the town, and lots of the towns in Norway did not have any electricity in those years, and we used kerosene lamps, and we were allowed only to get, I don't know what it was, 3 liters a month. So we would sit most of the time in the dark and only have it on for about 2 hours during the evening, and then we go to bed early. And if we were lucky, you know, well, I was a young guy then at that time, and if I can get hold of a candle and a book from somewhere, I would lay in bed reading with mittens on and heavy blankets on and a candle. That was something real nice. That was nice. You tell that to the people nowadays, they think you're nuts.
So did they just have faith that the U.S. and Britain were going to win? I mean,
well,
did you guys just firmly believe that they were going to win and it would end?
Was no doubt in our mind that it would take a while, but they would lose, because well, what we were waiting for more than anything else, we were getting ready for the American to make a landing in Norway, and we would chase them out of there. That's what we were waiting for more than anything else. But if they had done that, there would have been a lot more people killed, of course, and they have to bomb a lot. And of course, during the war, we were bombed quite a bit of the Americans and the British, you know, because of the factories that was making ammunition and stuff for the German, you know, those factories, they wanted to take them out. So it was quite a bit of bombing and of ships at the harbor. Olesen was bombed quite a bit, and that is the town where we had to go to buy things that we really needed, you know, like clothes or stuff like that. So every once in a while we had to go there if we wanted to or not, but it was very dangerous to go there because of the bombing. You know, I can remember a few times I was there and those sirens blow, you know.
Yeah, so they had like those air raid sirens like they show in the movies, and then they blow them and everybody has to go.
Yeah, and then wherever you were at, you hit for they had a different bomb shelter and basement that you had to go in, and sometimes you had to be in there for a couple of hours and more, you know, till it was over, you know. And then you come up and there's fires here and fires there, and it's a mess.
So your mom basically stayed on the farm.
Yeah.
If she didn't go to town, you would go to town.
Yeah, right.
So did you ever consider trying to go to Sweden to get away from them? Everybody just kind of stayed?
No, we didn't like the Swede that much.
Especially after they let those troops in, huh? Okay.
At that time, anyhow. It's different now. We've kind of forgotten them. Get along pretty good with them.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask. Did you guys have any Jews in your towns at all? You know, like the Jews, how they captured all them?
Not in the town where I was, but in Olesen there was some, and I heard that they were picked up, yes. I don't know too much about that.
It's like what, most Norwegians weren't Jews,
but every country, just about every country in the world has Jews, you know, and I know that there was some in Olesen that most of them were business people. You know.
So they did haul them?
Some of them they did. I don't know too much about that.
Okay, so Russia was fighting though with us, right?
Right.
With the U.S. Did Russian troops ever come from the other way? Because
no,
up by Oslo and then close to Russia, right?
No, Russia was, well, there's a long story there, you know. Russia was always fighting Finland. They wanted more ports in Finland, so back in 1938 and stuff, and 39, they were fighting Finland. And Finland was always fighting Russia, see, so the Germans sent troops up to Finland and helped the Finns fight Russia, because Finland and Russia never got along because they were always fighting them. So there was a little conflict there, but
so it's weird. They were in Finland, the Nazis, and they were in Norway, but they left Sweden alone.
Right. But at one time, I might say that the Germans decided that there was too much work and too hard to keep all Norway occupied like that. So the northern part of Norway wasn't too many people living there, you know. So they got all the way up to the Finnish border there, and they told the people to start moving south right away, you know, and then what they did, they would take all their cows and animals they had and kill them and take that for food, and then they would burn all their houses and quite a bit south. So those people who lived in the northern part of Norway had to go south, and they were homeless. There was quite a bit of that. going on. And I know in our town we took in quite a few families there from northern part of Norway because that's what we were supposed to do, you know. So they just burned everything.
So pretty much the Norwegians hated the Nazis.
Right. No time for it.
Do you think that being there and being oppressed by the Nazis left scars on the people?
Well, I'm sure that a lot of them did, you know, and the Germans were hated quite a bit, you know. Anything that had to do with Germans was bad, you know. But of course, these things changed as time went along.
You got used to them?
No, but people start realizing, you know, that Germany was too. I mean, all Germans weren't Nazi, you know. So people start saying, you know, there's two parties in Germany. There's the Nazi party and then the other party, you know. And the other party were, well, you can say here like the Democrat and the Republican, you know, whoever, probably half and half, you know. And we just start finding out some of the Germans were okay, you know, and some weren't, see. So the Nazi we hated, but the rest of the German we start, you know, saying, well, it wasn't their fault, you know. It was Hitler's fault. He's the one who caused all the problems, so.
But for like 4 years then you lived in
5 years.
5 years in fear of your life with the bombings and the soldiers being there and not having food. Do you think that leaves marks on people?
Oh, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. Another thing we had a lot of problems was with mines, drifting mines, you know, like people who would go on fishing boat. That was a common thing to make a living, you know. We'd go on fishing boat. There would be boats 35 foot to 65 foot or maybe bigger, and they would have 7, 8 men aboard a ship, you know, and there was herring season is in January and February, and they would go out and fish this, you know, and the problem they had was with drifting mines, and these mines, you know, would get caught in the net, and it's dark. They fish this at night, you know, and then there's a high sea, and the mines would hit the boat, and boom, goes the boat. So there was lots of family where the father and maybe had 2 sons with him on these boats. They all got killed, you know. There was quite a few of that, and sometimes there was mines drifted all the way ashore. Now, like in Sandvik, you know where that is the outer fjord of where we lived. A mine drifted, there was 2 or 3 different mines that exploded there. They drifted ashore, and then a big wave, you know, you just throw them against the rock, and they exploded. And even if you were 500 yards away from there, one house was, and they took the house, it was sitting like this, and then after it was sitting like that on the foundation, you know, and everything, stuff like that. I can remember one time I was sitting in my kitchen at my place, and I heard this explosion, and it felt like that the wall just caved right into my back, you know, but it didn't do no real damage, but to us, but it did damage to people who lived close by. So.
Okay, but I mean, it must be different for people because, you know, like, we live in America, nobody has to worry about food, they don't have to worry about getting killed and stuff. I mean, so do you think that affected you emotionally? Or you just block all that, or?
Kind of block it out. It's it has some effect on you probably, but I was young enough to kind of look over these things, you know. But I'm sure that there was a lot of people that probably didn't, that had effect on them, I'm sure.
So you think that maybe that affected your mom too, living through that when her husband was gone and...
Oh, sure.
and having to deal with the Nazis and even like your sisters too, you know. Did you see them after the war?
Who?
Your sisters.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So, well, because Gerd came with you. So did the other two come back home, or they just came
No,
to visit?
my oldest sister, she got married to a Norwegian, and he was a seaman. He was torpedoed once out in the ocean there, and of course he was at sea most of the time, and from not getting the right vegetable and stuff, he got that bone disease, so that your bone kind of melt away, you know. So he died from that. Petra, she got married to a Swede and lived in Stockholm, you know.
Right
But
away
that was
after the war.
after the war.
Shortly after that? Or?
Yeah, shortly after.
How did she meet a Swede then? He was in Norway?
She probably met him in Norway. I think she worked for a while in Oslo, and there was a lot of Swedes going into Oslo working, you know, and stuff. So that's where she met him.
So how come Gerd decided to go with you to America?
Well, we wanted to see what the world was like, you know, somewhere else. And especially for me, it was this way. I wanted to, if I was going to fight a war, I wanted to fight with a country that could win. I didn't like to fight with a country that could not win, you know. So that was one of my reasons. And by the way, after I had been here, I came in 47, and in 1950 I was drafted into the Korean War. So I got a good picture of what it is to be. I served in Korea for about a year, and I served in Japan for about a year. And in Korea, it was a war, and in Japan, I was an occupation soldier. So I got the picture of what it is to be an occupation soldier, and I got the picture of how it was to be a soldier fighting a war, and the experience from Norway to be under German occupation. So that's it.